Don't look at it until the sun's up. That's my grandfather's voice, crackling from the dusty cassette I found in his old truck. The tape label, written in his thick pencil scrawl, says, "Do not play after dark." The message repeats, soft and unsteady, like he recorded it knowing he wouldn't get another chance. I shut it off before the words settle. The air in the farmhouse feels heavier than it should, a mix of oil, dust, and something faintly sweet like grain gone bad. The floors bow and complain under my boots as I walk through the rooms that used to smell like cornbread and pipe smoke. Everything's right where it's always been, just left to rot in place. Out the kitchen window, the south field glows with the last of the sun. The Scarecrow stands where it always has, on the rise, near the old irrigation ditch. But something's off. It isn't facing the road anymore. It's turned toward the tree line, where the weed ends and the ground turns dark. I step outside. The wind's died down and the only sound is the slow tick of the porch light cooling. The Scarecrow's hat is still the one Grandpa made from his old feed cap, but the head, the burlap sack, seems different, looser, stretched. The grin stitched across it sags unevenly, like it's tired of pretending. Grandpa used to say the Scarecrow was his insurance policy. "A man can fix fences and oil hinges," he'd tell me, "but there are things a farm needs scared away that don't come with feathers." I'd laughed, thinking it was one of his country superstitions, the kind you tell a boy to keep him from wandering too far into the wheat. Now, standing here, I'm not so sure it was a joke. The cassette sits on the kitchen counter where I left it, the little reels still slowly spinning. When I press play again, his voice trembles with that rasp he always got after harvest season. "It moved last night," he says. "I tried to turn it back. Don't look at it until the sun's up. If you do, it knows I let the tape hiss to a stop." My reflection in the dark window looks older than I remember. Same tired eyes Grandpa had in his last years. I tell myself I'm just run down, that the mind plays tricks when the silence gets thick enough. After sunset, the house feels too big. I light a single lantern, more for company than light, and sit by the window. The Scarecrow's outline is still visible, black against gray. At least, I think it is. It's hard to tell when the horizon keeps swallowing things. A breeze comes and goes, but the Scarecrow doesn't move. No sway, no shift. Still as bone. The longer I stare, the more I start to feel like it's listening. Around midnight, the radio on the counter clicks once. No power, just a pop of static. And I hear it. A faint knock. Not on the door, not the window. It's softer than that. Hollow, wood against wood, from the field. I freeze. Another knock follows, spaced out, deliberate, like someone rapping on a post. My first thought is the windmill, then the barn door, then the old apple tree rubbing against the fence. But each excuse feels thinner than the last. I grip the lantern and make myself stay seated. Grandpa's warning crawls back through my head like a prayer I don't remember learning. Don't look at it until the sun's up. The knocking stops. The house sighs. The silence that follows feels expectant, the kind that waits to see what you'll do next. I blow out the lantern, sit in the dark, and listen until the crickets return. I don't look, not until the sun's up. By morning, I have convinced myself the knocks were just part of the dream, the kind that burrows into your head and leaves a residue. But when I stepped outside, the dew was still fresh, and the first thing I saw were footprints, shallow impressions leading from the porch steps toward the field. Not boots, not shoes. Bare. Wide. Heavy enough to bend the wheat. The Scarecrow hadn't moved, at least not that I could tell. Still facing the trees, arms drooping like a tired sentinel. A crow circled once overhead but never landed. I told myself I'd had enough of ghosts and small-town legends, so I got to work. Fixed the pump, swept the porch, anything to keep from looking too long at that crooked silhouette in the distance. But even as I worked, I could feel it. The way you can feel someone staring through glass. By noon, the heat settled in, thick and breathless. I went down to the cellar to see if the generator still worked. The smell hit me first. Dust, old oil, and something faintly metallic. The bulb above me flickered once, then died, leaving the whole space a honeycomb of shadow. I found a lantern and lit it. That's when I saw the tapes. Dozens of them, stacked in milk crates near the workbench, each labeled by date in my grandfather's handwriting. The oldest was from the mid-70s. The newest? Just 3 days before he died. I picked one up at random and fed it into the cassette player. His voice came through clearer this time, deliberate, strained, like he was reading from notes. It turned again last night. I tied it down with fence wire. Didn't matter. Faced the trees come morning. A pause, the scrape of the chair. Crows won't come near it. Haven't in months. Even the stray dogs keep to the north side. I played another. Something's under there, he whispered. Roots, maybe. Or not roots. I dug a foot down before I hit something soft. Felt it breathing. The tape ended in static. I sat in the dark long after it stopped, the lantern trembling slightly in my hand. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the cracks in the floorboards above me. It almost sounded like someone walking slow circles around the house. When I finally came back up, the sun had slipped west, turning the fields bronze. I stood on the porch and listened. The air felt wrong, too still, too full. The Scarecrow was still in place, but the post leaned now, a fraction to the left. I told myself it must have been the soil loosening, the wood settling. I even convinced myself for a moment that the tapes were just Grandpa losing his mind. Too much isolation, too many years of talking to wind and wire. Then, just as the last light drained away, I heard it again. Knock. Knock. I froze at the doorway. The sound wasn't from the post this time. It was closer. From the barn. I grabbed the lantern and crossed the yard, every step louder than the one before. The barn door was half open, the chain lock dangling like something chewed through it. Inside, the air smelled of hay, metal, and rot. Something had disturbed the straw in the far corner. Deep furrows, like a body had been dragged. The shovel Grandpa used to keep propped by the feed bin was gone. In its place sat another cassette tape, half buried in straw. No label. I didn't listen to it that night. I couldn't. I locked the barn, walked back to the porch, and sat down with my back to the door. The wheat swayed under the moonlight. The Scarecrow stood still. For a moment, I thought I could make out its grin, wider than before, teeth of thread glinting like wet wire. Then the wind died, and in the silence that followed, something whispered my name. Just once, from the direction of the south field. By morning, I was ready to pack up and leave. The air felt wrong, dense somehow, like the house was breathing. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion, that I'd let a couple of old tapes and sleepless nights get under my skin. But when I stepped outside, the truth hit me square in the chest. The Scarecrow had moved. It still stood in the south field, but the post had shifted a good 2 feet to the left. Even from the porch, I could see the drag marks in the dirt where it had been pulled. Not by the wind, but something stronger. Its head was tilted slightly upward now, like it was watching the house. I turned around and went back inside, hands shaking just enough to spill the coffee I hadn't even tasted yet. That's when I noticed the phone light blinking on the counter. The landline shouldn't even work. I hadn't called the utility company yet, but the red light pulsed steady. The message was from Mrs. Lentz, the woman who owned the property north of ours. She'd left her number and said she wanted to talk about the Scarecrow. I drove out around noon, following the same road I used to bike as a kid. Her house sat on a rise overlooking both our fields, and the porch was sagging under wind chimes that never seemed to stop. She answered the door before I knocked, squinting like she'd been expecting me. "Your granddad," she said without greeting. "He didn't leave you much peace, did he?" I told her I'd been cleaning up the place, that I'd found some tapes and maybe he'd been losing his grip toward the end. Her eyes hardened. He wasn't crazy. He just saw what the rest of us pretended not to. She led me to the kitchen, poured weak tea into cracked mugs, and started talking like she'd been holding it in for years. She told me about a drifter who came through one harvest season decades ago. Said he'd been sleeping in barns, offering to work for meals. My grandfather hired him for a few days, said he worked like the devil was on his heels. Then one morning he was gone. No one ever saw him again. A week later, the Scarecrow appeared. Not the old one that used to hang there, a new one, different clothes, same height, same build as the missing man. The sheriff chalked it up to rumor, but people talked. They said Grandpa had found the man stealing tools, that there'd been a fight. I asked her if she believed that. She looked out the window toward the fields, where the horizon wavered in the heat. "I believe he buried something out there that never stayed buried." When I left her house, the sky was already turning the color of brass. Back home, the air felt charged, a storm building somewhere far off. I stood at the edge of the porch, staring across the fields. The Scarecrow was closer again, not by much, maybe a few feet, but enough that I could see more detail now. The burlap had frayed along one side of the jaw, and underneath it something dark gleamed. Not straw, something that caught the light like flesh. I ran a hand over my face and told myself I was losing it, that Mrs. Lentz had filled my head with stories and I was seeing what I wanted to see. I even grabbed a flashlight and started toward it, determined to end this nonsense once and for all. But halfway there, the wind changed. It rolled low and heavy across the wheat, carrying with it a smell that didn't belong. Damp soil and iron, like a grave unearthed. I stopped. Every hair on my arms lifted. The Scarecrow's shadow stretched long in the dying light, its shape bending across the rows like it was reaching. Then, as if the whole field was holding its breath, the wind stopped completely. A single crow called from somewhere far off. I turned toward the sound, and when I looked back, the Scarecrow's head was facing me. I dropped the flashlight. It went out on impact. In the brief, perfect silence that followed, I heard the creak of wood, the sound of a post leaning, settling, or stepping forward. I ran. By the time I slammed the door behind me, the knocking had started again. Not patient this time. Harder, closer, from the field, from the dark. And when it finally stopped, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The knocking hadn't been coming from one post anymore. It had been two. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house felt like a footstep, every groan of the wind like someone whispering through the keyhole. By dawn, the windows were fogged from my breath, and I'd worn a path between the kitchen and the porch door. When the sun finally burned through the haze, I stepped outside with the shovel. If the thing had moved again, I was going to prove it, dig the post out, drag it to the burn pit, and be done with this farm and its ghosts. The field looked calm in the daylight, too calm. The wheat swayed in soft gold arcs, but no insects hummed, no birds called. Just silence, and the steady, patient shape of the Scarecrow, standing where it always stood. Only now there were two. The second one was shorter, the post fresher, wood pale and unweathered. It stood just a few yards behind the first, its arms spread wide, empty sleeves flapping faintly in the wind. No head yet, no hat, just a body waiting for a purpose. My stomach turned cold. Someone or something had planted it during the night. I crossed the yard fast, the shovel heavy in my grip. I didn't let myself think about the drag marks in the dirt or the faint impression of footprints circling the new post. When I reached the original Scarecrow, I stopped short. The burlap head had sagged forward, the grin torn wider, and beneath the rip, something dark and leathery pressed against the fabric. The gloves on its hands were split along the fingers. Inside was no straw, only something that looked like tendon, black and shriveled, wrapped around the wire. I hit the post with the shovel, once, twice. The wood didn't move. It felt solid, like I was striking a root buried deep in stone. When I turned the shovel into the soil, the metal bit sank maybe a foot before hitting something soft. Not dirt, not clay. The shovel bounced, and the ground let out a sound I will never forget. A low, wet exhale. I dropped the handle and stumbled back. From behind me came a slow, measured creak. I turned toward the house. The screen door was open. Inside, the phone rang. Once. Then again. I didn't remember plugging it in. I ran back across the yard, nearly slipping on the porch steps. The ringing stopped the moment I touched the receiver. Only static on the other end, soft at first, then layered with the faint sound of breathing. And beneath it, my grandfather's voice. "It wants company, Caleb. It's been waiting for you." I dropped the phone. The line clicked dead. The next few hours blurred together. I locked every door, every window, and sat in the living room with the shotgun across my knees. The wind came and went. Sometimes I thought I heard movement in the field, the faint rustle of wheat that wasn't wind-driven. At dusk, I dared another look outside. The second Scarecrow wasn't empty anymore. A burlap head now crowned it, sewn roughly at the neck. The stitching gleamed fresh, wet. And tied to its post, hanging limp, was my shovel, handle splintered, blade stained dark. That was when I saw it. A flicker in the window's reflection. The original Scarecrow's head turned, just slightly, toward me. The power went out. The whole house dropped into silence, so deep it pressed against my ribs. Somewhere beyond the walls, wood cracked, a post shifting or breaking free. The radio on the counter snapped to life all by itself. My grandfather's voice again, warped with static. "It doesn't scare crows anymore, boy. It scares what comes for you." I backed away from the window. Every instinct screamed to leave, to drive until the plains were just a rumor behind me. But when I reached for the keys on the hook, they were gone. The front door was open again. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed the room was the wheat bending in waves, slow, deliberate, as something moved through it, heading straight for the porch. And standing at the edge of the yard, side by side now, the two scarecrows waited, both facing the house. The storm lasted until nearly dawn. When it finally broke, the sky had gone the color of old bone. The air was sharp and metallic, every puddle shining with a strange film that caught the weak morning light. I barely slept, just sat in the kitchen with the shotgun laid across my knees, counting the seconds between thunder and silence. When I finally stepped outside, the world smelled like wet straw and rot. The scarecrows were gone, both of them. The posts still stood, raw and splintered where something had been pulled free, the holes in the earth wide enough to swallow my boots. I told myself the wind had torn them down, that they'd been dragged by the storm into the trees. But the tracks didn't lead away. They led toward the house. A line of deep impressions crossed the yard, as if something heavy had walked there. Not boots, not hooves. Bare feet, the same wide, flat prints I'd seen days before. Each step left behind a thin smear of mud, dark as blood. I backed up until I hit the porch rail. The door behind me creaked. Inside, the air had changed. The smell of wet earth had followed me in. The radio clicked on again, though I'd ripped the cord out the night before. My grandfather's voice came through, barely a whisper now. "You can't burn what's been promised. Just make sure it faces the road, Caleb. That's the only thing that keeps it still." Then static. Something scraped against the kitchen window, slow, deliberate. I turned, hard in my throat. The glass was wet, the reflection warped, but I could make out a shape, tall, thin, with something draped across its shoulders. For a moment I thought it was the scarecrow itself standing just outside. Then I realized the head wasn't burlap anymore. It was bare, human. I ran. The back door blew open as I hit it, the wind screaming through the yard. The field bent in waves, stalks snapping under invisible weight. And there, in the center of the wheat, the scarecrows stood again, upright, replanted. Only one was still made of straw. The other wore my grandfather's flannel shirt, his old cap, his boots. The post through his back looked freshly driven. I don't remember crossing the yard. I don't remember dropping to my knees in front of it. But I remember the way the burlap mask on the first scarecrow moved, how the stitches flexed like something breathing underneath. I reached out, and for a heartbeat, the air around me felt alive, humming, pulsing through the ground. Then, the mouth on the burlap tore open. It wasn't a scream that came out. It was a sound of release, like air rushing out of a sealed jar. The wheat bowed in all directions, and something cold pressed through me, a shape without a body. The smell of iron filled my nose. I stumbled back, blinded by light, by motion, and when I opened my eyes again, the scarecrows stood still. Both of them. The first faced the road once more. The second, the one that wore my grandfather's clothes, faced the trees. Rain started again, soft and whispering. I don't remember leaving. I just remember driving until the fields turned to towns, until there were lights that stayed on and people who didn't flinch at the wind. I left the house open. I left the keys. 3 weeks later, a realtor called, said she'd driven out to assess the property and found everything remarkably well kept. She laughed when she said even the scarecrows looked new. I hung up before she finished. That night, a package arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape, unlabeled except for a single line in my grandfather's handwriting. Turn back before dark. I haven't played it. I don't need to. Because sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can still hear the faint knock, knock, knock. Steady and patient, somewhere out past the edge of town. And I know, without looking, they're still facing the house. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to leave a like. It helps the channel more than you know. And if you've ever driven past an empty field at night and thought you saw something standing just a little too still, maybe keep your eyes on the road. This has been Campfire Horror Stories, where every light that flickers might not be the wind. Subscribe for more tales from the dark corners of America. New stories every week. Until next time, keep your lanterns lit, and whatever you do, don't look until the sun's up.